In 1940, tasked by FDR with finding a suitable secret location for atomic research and testing, the Muroc Expedition, a first Special Forces mission of its kind, stumbled upon the Dulce subterranean complex, discovering our world is not what it seems. Let's explore. Hi everyone, and welcome to Project Blue Book, where we explore all things unidentified. I am Thor, and thanks for tuning in. Let's first establish how we know what we know. In 1979, an event took place at Dulce that called attention to it by outsiders and likely led to the whistleblowing. It was a battle over who was in charge, and the humanoid aliens felt a need to teach the humans a lesson. A security agent at Dulce, Thomas Costello, came forward with claims of alien presence in a 7-level underground complex underneath the Archuleta Mesa, northern New Mexico. New Mexico State Trooper Gabriel Valdez began researching frequent cattle mutilations in the Dulce area dating to the mid-1970s, a time that corresponds perfectly with the Dulce killings of 1979, a topic for another episode. In 1995, Paul Schneider stated during his geological and explosive works tenure at Dulce, while employed by Morrison Knudsen, he encountered alien greys on a regular basis. He was suicided a year after he began talking. And in 2010, on January 8th, Colonel X was interviewed by Anthony E. Sanchez to become the source for his book, UFO Highway. And John Lear of the Learjet Fortune has stated 4 separate and independent interviews with former Dulce staff members corroborate Colonel X's story. Colonel X, in turn, has corroborated many of Phil Snyder's claims made prior to himself coming forward. Then there are the Jicarilla Apaches, whose living legend speaks of ancestors fighting monsters within the earth underneath the Archuleta Mesa, right by Dulce. They also remember between 1947 and 1949 that scores of construction workers kept showing up in trucks marked the Smith Corporation of Paragosa Springs, Colorado, a company that does not exist and never did, carrying scores of building materials, concrete, timber, road building material, and construction equipment, as if building a whole town out there. Oddly, nothing was ever seen being built, and in 1949, the road they built to carry the material onto the Archuleta Mesa was dismantled, and they left as if nothing ever happened. The Muroc Expedition of 1940 was responding to FDR's concerns. In 1937, physicists Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard wrote a letter to President Roosevelt warning him of nuclear advances made by the Germans, that the US needed to counter this knowledge to prevent the Nazis from taking over the world. FDR commissioned Dr. Lyman Briggs to head up the Uranium Committee and tasked the military to find a suitable secret location for nuclear research, development, and testing. A team was put together at Muroc Army Airfield in California, consisting of military geological surveyors, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, trackers, cave experts, sharpshooters, and regular soldiers, all handpicked for the mission. It turned out to be the perfect combination of talent for the discovery they were about to make. They set out to search the desolate, high Archuleta Mesa plateau, sitting 8,000 to 9,000 feet above sea level in the northern region of New Mexico, and came upon cave entrances that looked modified and not fully natural, well hidden into the landscape. When they went inside, they first realized the floor was too flat to be natural, but they kept going and soon came upon equipment, technological machinery, radars, screens, electric cables, giant flat TV sets, computer workstations with keyboards and monitors that did not exist in 1940. So to them, it looked like a collection of typewriters and televisions, workstations that oddly looked too small to fit an adult human. They saw severed cables still emitting light, The account of these experiences and their detailed description was documented because the Muroc Expedition team members were all tasked with reporting their day-to-day experiences. Colonel X was made privy to these files in 1979. Their first reaction was a complete confusion and disorientation. All this high-tech futuristic equipment, they couldn't make sense of it and realized it superseded anything they knew to exist in 1940. Yet it was covered in cobwebs and dust, as if it had been sitting there for centuries, unused. Nothing seemed to fit. After a day of observation, the Muroc team set up camp outside the cavern entrance and had a good night's uneventful sleep. The second day was set with intentions to go deeper, pursuing tunnels that seemed to lead to a second floor. Who knows how many floors there were? In the end, at least 7 floors were discovered. But for the Muroc Expedition, 3 floors would be explored before their ultimate retreat. As they went deeper into the first floor caverns, the walls became smooth as glass, like windows, showing liquid material inside a razor-thin compartment. If you touched it, your fingerprints remained for a while before fading away. You could write on these walls, temporarily. They had never seen anything like it before. And then they came upon the strangest, unexpected collection of artifacts. Bows, arrows, knives, and late 19th century Winchester rifles and Colt revolvers. They looked to be from the late 1800s and were in decent condition. And then they saw the bodies. Native American mummified remains, some with gaping wounds after battle. The Muroc commander included his thoughts in his reports. What were Apaches doing in these caves? And who were they fighting? Everything felt out of place. As they went deeper, the tunnels looked more constructed. Here, everything looked designed, including subluminescent lighting that bounced off the walls and ceilings, faint purple lavender in color. Now the walls were covered with black polished surfaces like metallic granite. Side rooms appeared, filled with technology equipment. What was the power source? The commander wrote. There were more bodies, not just Apaches, but others. They looked like children, skinny, with big heads, pointy chins, and huge eye sockets. Without a reference, the Muroc team tried to understand what tribe this was. They would come to realize they weren't looking at a tribe. They were looking at a whole different species. The signs of fighting were everywhere, with numerous casualties on both sides. On the second floor, they also found the metallic-looking tablets covered in writings, later discovered to be related to Akkadian Sumerian cuneiform writing, only more complicated. The commander of the Muroc Expedition at this point had called in archaeologists to help sort this out. This wasn't just a science discovery. This was an archaeological find. They started removing the technology artifacts, carefully cataloging everything they found and removed. They hauled it to the surface and trucked it down to Alamogordo, where planes had flown in using a dirt strip to retrieve the artifacts. Everything was shipped back to Muroc. Muroc would become Edwards Air Force Base, and Alamogordo dirt strip would become Holloman Air Force Base. On the third day, they went deeper still, to see where this complex would end. That's when they became aware that they were being watched. Someone was monitoring their movements. From around corners, staring back, they pretended not to see these inhabitants, they called them, and the inhabitants tried to remain invisible. That's when they began hearing the noises. First static hissing sounds that lasted for minutes, then super fast beeping sounds like warning alarms set off by traffic in the tunnels. And as they went deeper, the frequency and tone changed, becoming more intense at every corner. The inhabitants, whoever they were, kept spying, never engaging, and always maintaining their distance. A loud shrieking noise interlaced with what seemed to be screaming of children. Many had to walk away and take a break. It was that intense. If these soundscapes were meant to permanently scare them away, it didn't work. The Muroc team discovered there was a pattern that repeated itself. It didn't escalate, it repeated. It was a deterrent that wasn't working on this team. Then the sound stopped altogether, completely. And that's when the commanding officer ordered the team to pack up. They were returning to the surface. As the soldiers started packing, 2 soldiers, frustrated by the sight of the inhabitants without an opportunity to engage, decided to go deeper on their own. They wanted to find out who was there watching them. They discovered a tight walkway down to another floor and followed it, even if the heat, smell, and humidity became almost unbearable. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a room full of medical equipment, tubes, research tables, and animals in cages. The room also had flat TVs lined up against the walls. Around 50 inhabitants were gathered in the room, staring at the screens. There was a lot to process here for the soldiers. They saw these screens showing tunnels and rooms of the complex above, including the Muroc team's current working areas. They saw their own team packing up on one level above on the screen. And another screen even had a view of their base camp outside the entrance. They realized these strange inhabitants had been watching their every move and knew their exact locations at all times. Staring at the inhabitants was even more confusing. They looked like a group of children, as small as 4 feet, but some were much taller, more than 7 feet, and still looked like children. They moved around with strange, rapid body movements, performing tests with the equipment. The soldiers, still undetected, listened to their conversations, described as a combination of whispers and clicking sounds. The soldiers were realizing they were not staring at children. They looked completely different from any humans they had ever seen. This was something different. The fear of the unknown was settling in. The only thought now was to get out of there unseen. So they turned around. Having held tight to his pistol, one of the soldiers, as he moved up the tunnel, dropped his gun. The sound reverberated through the room. Their cover was blown. The inhabitants looked towards him and reacted quickly. They were coming for him. Soldiers ran for their lives. The inhabitants got a hold of one of them and dragged him back into the room down the stairs. Hearing the screaming of his fellow soldier disappearing behind him, the other knew he was running for his life. As he came up to the next floor, he bolted as fast as he could, with a number of inhabitants chasing him. He started shouting for help and shooting back behind him. The Muroc team, still packing up, heard shots fired, and then saw the soldiers charging towards them, screaming incoherently, and they saw he was being followed by inhabitants. Training kicked in. The commander ordered everyone to take cover behind artifacts and equipment and wait for his order. When the inhabitants were less than 30 yards away, he ordered them to shoot. A battle ensued. Some of the inhabitants had no weapons and started running back into the tunnels. Others continued to fight. In hindsight, according to the commanding officer's report, he felt the enemy was taken by surprise by their ferocious fighting ability and weapons. Perhaps they thought they were meeting an enemy with similar weapons as the Apaches. But this was 1940. They had World War II weapons, not pioneer-era Winchester rifles. There's a description of at least one hand-to-hand combat between an inhabitant and a soldier. As he tried to knife it, the enemy tore at him with bare limbs, ripping his hand off, stabbing him with his pointy fingers, toying with him, and seemingly in no hurry to kill him. It was a cruel and disturbing encounter. The battle lasted for 3 hours. Then the inhabitants retrieved back into the cairns, and the Muroc team gathered their dead and wounded and brought them to the surface. They also took 3 bodies of the inhabitants with them in body bags. They would seal the entrance and return with their findings to home base and report. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, where Dulce would ultimately become part of a scientific research and development station overseen by Los Alamos National Laboratories under the name of Rio Aux Scientific and Technological Underground Auxiliary, a topic for another episode. You can watch and listen to this and other podcasts on Project Blue Book, where we explore all things unidentified. Each day, let's practice compassion and kindness. And please subscribe. I am Thor, and thanks for listening. See you next time.